Hello everyone, this is our presentation about two-factor authentication, also known as 2FA. It's become quite popular, with many big companies are using it now, such as Google. Most of you probably already heard of it, and you've probably also have used it before. So this is just going to be about 2FA first, and then we'll move into the demo. So what exactly is two-factor authentication? So two-factor authentication is when applications require users to verify their identity in two unique ways. There are many ways to go about this, with email, biometrics, or mobile phones, like in this picture. And so there's kind of three things for two-factor authentication. It needs two of these three somethings. So the first one is something you know, so something like your password or your username or a PIN number or an email, something that is your classic kind of login page. The second thing, or one of the two things you need, is mobile, something you have. So if you have like a mobile device or access to another application. And then the last one is something you are, so a biological unique feature, such as your eyes or your fingers prints. And you only need two of these three things for two-factor authentication. Okay? So how does it work? Essentially what happens is when you go to a website, you'll be prompted to log in, and you just log in with your username, password, or email and password, whatever it asks you for. And then it'll send you to another page where it'll ask for a one-time use token for you to enter, which they will either send it to you via email or by phone, like SMS message, and then you'll enter that token in and you will get access to the application. This is sort of the basic idea of 2FA, because there are different versions that don't require you to use a one-use token, but this is kind of the basic idea of how it works. Okay. The next part, why are we using 2FA? Well, the overall idea is it's increased security. By asking users to confirm their identity twice, it makes it more difficult for ill-intent people to gain access to your account. So if you're just using like a username and password, it's pretty easy for people to get access to those things, right? Like you get those spam emails saying, oh, I have access to your account all the time, and they give you like your password, which yeah, it's pretty easy to do. But by adding two-factor authentication, having you to have access to something else to be able to access your account, it makes it more secure, such as if you need to be able to have your phone to get a token from it, like it's more difficult for people to gain access to your phone. Of course, it still can happen, right? There are different types of 2FA, and they all have different security levels. As I said before, a one-time token can be a victim of phishing scams, where people gain access to like kind of the requests in between, but it depends on which one you use. So next we're going to talk about the types of 2FA. So we have the email one-time token, where they just email you. So you're given email, like a code, you just enter it. And similar with the SMS, they'll text it to you instead, or sometimes even like they'll call you on the phone as well. And then they also have apps. So the apps is kind of interesting because it's a little bit different, because they don't use a one-time token. They use a time-based one-time password. It's part of the open authentication architecture, and basically it locally generates a key for you to use on a given application. If anyone who uses Discord here, Discord does that for 2FA, and also in our example we'll be looking at that as well. So then the other one is push-based. So it's basically where when you try to log in, it'll send something to your phone, and you'll have to just click a button to say like, yep, this is me, you can log me in, sort of thing. And then biometrics basically is your fingerprint, maybe a retina scan, those kinds of things. And hardware tokens, so those are like, often they're USB sticks, and basically you just plug it in to your computer whenever you try to log in, and then it'll generate a random code, which you'll then have to enter. Of course, they're really secure because they're not connected to the internet, right? But they, the kind of flaw with them is they're pretty easy to lose, and they're expensive. Okay, so lastly, we'll look at the examples of two-factor authentication, just to give you a better idea of like what it is, because you've probably used one of these items before. So Twitch uses an email version, so they'll send you an email with a code that you enter in here. And then Google gives you sort of the app push one, where you just say, yep, it's me. And then Heroku has different options actually, so you can choose different ones, and same with Amazon, they have different options as well. So yeah, that is two-factor authentication explained.
The purpose of this tutorial is to show you how to take an application with basic login functionality and add two-factor authentication to it. As Lani mentioned, there are many different types of two-factor authentication, but in this tutorial, we're going to focus on the token-based methods and show you how to implement two separate options, one with the Google Authenticator app and the other using the Vonage Verify API. As with most two-factor authentication methods, the examples we give here first require that the user is pre-authenticated with basic login credentials. So the user registers with your site, then logs in using their username and password, then proceeds to the second factor authentication. For this tutorial, the first level of authentication is similar to the app we created in class, where the username and password are stored in a MongoDB database and verified using the password local strategy. Now we get into the second factor. For the Google Authenticator option, once the user is logged into the site with their credentials, a QR code appears on the screen. They need to scan this code using the Google Authenticator app on their phone. Google then sends the user a code, which is only active for a limited time. They must then enter the code into the verification box on the website before the time is up, or else a new code will be generated. Once the user enters the code, the system verifies a match, and two-factor authentication is complete, with site access being granted to the user. As a second option, we also wanted to show you how to add two-factor authentication via SMS tokens. In this case, the registered user logs into the site with their credentials and is then asked for their phone number. Their number is then sent to the Vonage Verify API, which generates a secret token and sends that to the user via text message. The user then enters this code into the verification box on your site. The system ensures that they match, and then ta-da, two-factor authentication is completed and full access is granted to the user. All right, so let's get into the actual coding. To simplify the tutorial, we have created a starter project which provides an application which is pre-built with basic login authentication functionalities. This starter code will then be modified to implement each two-factor authentication method that I just mentioned. To get the starter code, I want you to navigate to the GitHub repo that's linked here. I'm just going to walk you through that now. When you get to the repo, click on the green code button. This is going to bring up the different cloning options. And what you need to do is copy the URL for the repo. Then open a new project in VS Code or whatever IDE you'd like to use. I click on the source control and clone the repository and enter the URL I copied. Then you select the location you'd like to download the repo to. I'm just choosing my desktop for ease. And once it's finished cloning, you can open the project. You will notice that there's several folders, one with the starter code, which is the one that you'll be working in, as well as options for the finished codes for each of the 2FA options, so that you can refer to a completed version for each implementation. You can go ahead and open a terminal and navigate to the starter code. Now that you're in the starter code directory, you can have a look at the starter code structure. It's really a familiar project structure. It's created using the Express generator, just as we did in class. All the required routing and passport local strategy has already been set up for you. So you can feel free to use the same database that's included in the starter files as well for storing your user credentials. Or you have the option of connecting to your own database by making the appropriate changes in the config file under global.js. And you'll just have to change your connection string here. So back in the terminal, you can run the project using npm start or nodemin if you have it installed. This will allow you to see the basic login action on localhost 3000. So let's check that out. You're now set to register a new user. Once they're logged into the site successfully, you're now ready to add two-factor authentication. And I'll let Connor take it from here.
Alright, now that we have our starter code, we're going to be implementing two-factor authentication into it. We're doing this by generating a time-based one-time password from the Google Authenticator app. So we will need to download the Google Authenticator onto our phones from the App Store. I am downloading that from the Google Play Store. The Google Authenticator app will scan a QR code from our web application and then generate a token, which we'll be entering into our app for verification. After we have the Google Authenticator app, let's take a look at our application. We're just going to run this right now, and we can look at what we have to start with. We have the 4 buttons here, as simple as we can get it. Right now, we're only using one-factor authentication, using the username and password in which we had set up in class using the Passport Npm module. Here we have a page that we can't access unless we're authenticated. But first, we need an account. So, let's make an account. And the login is successful. We're currently logged in here. And what we have here, if you want to set up your two-factor authentication or change the two-factor authentication method, we'll go to Account Settings. Click this link or click on our username. We're going to the account page, but that account page does not exist right now. So we're going to be creating that along with a few other views. Alright, let's create these views. So we have here this file that doesn't exist, the account file. So we're going to go into the view page, click New File, account.handlebars, HBS. For the sake of time, I'm going to be copying over the HTML code. You can pause at any time and type this out. This will be the page in which we'll be selecting which method of two-factor authentication we want to implement. For this demo, we're just going to be showing you Google Authentication, or the Google Authenticator. In the next demo, you'll see an additional method. So we'll save that right here, and we see this is linking to a folder and a file in which we also don't have. So we have Google Authentication, Authenticator. And that has an index.handlebars and validate code.handlebars. The validate code.handlebars is just a simple form with a little label. This is where we'll be entering the code generated by the Google Authenticator app. We also will be putting that when we are first setting up the Google Authenticator in the index. Again, copying this over. We see here at the top we have something we've seen before, a little if message. So this only appears if we are passing this view a message. And it's going to be an error message, alert danger. Here we have the QR code that's going to be displayed for the user, which is also going to be passed to this view from the router. And a form very identical to the validate code form, but this also includes a hidden variable for the key, which is also being passed by the router. Okay, now that we have these views created, our first step is going to be adding some variables to the model stored in the MongoDB. See part 1 here, we're adding a secret key, which is a string, and the two-factor authentication method, which is also a string. For the purposes of this demo, this is just going to be storing Google, because that's going to be the method we're using, and the secret key is going to be generated later on in the router. So with these models updated, or just the model updated, what we're going to do next is we're going to be telling app.js where this file is. So we're going to go into app.js, and like we've done 100 times before, we're going to be initializing this router. This is the Google Authenticator router. It's going to require routes / Google Authenticator. There we go. It shows up right there. We need to put this into quotes. Throw a semicolon at the end there. And we need to tell the app to use this. So we're going to scroll down. Step 3. App.use. We're going to say where it is. And throw another semicolon at the end there. Okay, so the next step we're going to do here is installing the Npm module Speak Easy. I already have this installed, but we can always type that again. And from here, we're going to go into the routes folder. Okay, so from here, what we're going to do is include the required modules. So we have the usual here, the express, router, and then importing the user as well. But we're also going to import the npm module, Speak Easy, and Passport for authentication. Our next step is to grab the isLoggedIn middleware function from index.js. Now that is what we had created in class. It is identical to that. It's using the isAuthenticated method to check to see if the user is logged in. Okay, in our next step, we're going to be creating a get handler for the index within the Google Authenticator folder. First thing we're going to do is the thing that we always do, router.get for the index. We're going to throw that middleware function in here to make sure the user is authenticated first, and then the request, response, and next. And we're going to create an encoded key. This is going to end up being our secret key. We're using the Speak Easy method here to generate a secret code. And that's going to be base 32. And with that, we're going to be generating the URL to generate the QR image. So first we're going to have one-time password URL. And we're going to throw the username in here from the request, username. And it's going to be asking for a secret, spelt correctly though. And that secret is the encoded key that we had just created. And then finally, it's going to ask us how long we want this password to say active for. And that's going to be 30 seconds. Next, we're going to be getting the URL for the QR image. And so that is from the Google API. and we're going to append to the end of this the OTP URL that we had just created there, but that's going to need to be encoded. URI component. So OTP URL. Perfect. So that is the URL for our QR image. And as you saw before, the messages, these are for any errors, and it's going to be saved in a session variable. This is the exact same way that we had done this in class. So this should look familiar. Just clearing that out. And let's throw some semicolons on the end here. The next step would be to render the view. I'm just going to copy and paste that. So we're going to be rendering the index, passing the user, the QR image, the key, and the messages. And I had also noticed I missed closing that bracket and throwing a semicolon at the end. So that is the get handler for that index page. Now we need a post handler because that page has a form in it. What that's going to do is after we scan this QR image that we're passing to the view, you type in the token that is generated on your app, and it's going to verify that and then save the information if it's successful. So because that's a lot of stuff here, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to copy and paste this entire method and walk through it, so we don't have to see me type it all out and make small spelling mistakes. But I also need to copy it correctly. Perfect. There we go. So we have this post handler for the index. We're also throwing that isLoggedIn middleware function just to see if they're still logged in using the one-factor authentication. And we're going to grab that token that they had typed into the input and then grab the secret key which we had just generated previously. And you'll remember that that was actually stored here in the key. So we go back to the router. We're checking to see if the user is verified using the speakeasy method totp.verify. It takes a base 32 secret key, we tell it what kind of encoding it is, and then the token. Through that it does some math and checks to see if it's verified. If it is verified, that means we're going to need to update the user and pass them the secret key and the two-factor authentication method. If we're going to do that, check to see if there's any errors there, and then set this session variable to true, and then redirect us back to login success like we usually do. Now if they aren't successful, if they've typed in the wrong key, then it will refresh the page, redirect them back to the same page, and throw a message saying, please try again. So now we're done the hard part, which was showing the user a QR image, having them scan it, type in the token that the Google Authenticator app shows to them, and then verifying that token is correct. If it is, it means that they've probably done it correctly, and we can set that secret key that we generated previously to the user model, and then just say the two-factor authentication method is Google. But we also need a page that will just authenticate a token and not update the method. So let's paste this here for the validate code view. Remember, that is literally just a form with one input. It's very easy to render. This is something we've done 100 times in class, so I don't think I need to explain that again. And then for the post, this is something new. We're grabbing the token which the user typed in from the body, and then the user's base 32 secret from the user model. With that, we're able to hand it to this method with speakeasy totp.verify, and that's going to do, again, some math and verify if the user is logged in or not. If they are, then we have this session variable keeping track of whether or not they have been authenticated with two-factor authentication, and we'll send them to the login success page. If they fail, we just send them back in the exact same view. Finally, on this router, we need to export it so that app.js knows what to grab. Okay, now we're on step 10. After we've completed that, now we're on step 11. What we need to do now is create a get handler for account.hbs, this account view. So that's also very, very simple. That would be in the index.js in the routes folder. And again, I'll copy that over. It is just a get accounts is logged in, that middleware function again, request, response, and then next. And then we render the view. At this point, what we've done is we have generated the QR code, they've scanned it, typed in the token, we can verify that, but we don't yet know whether or not they've been logged in or not. So we're going to scroll up here to step 12. We're going to want to create another middleware function. We'll copy that over so you don't have to watch me type it. And we have here, is two-factor authenticated. From here, what we're doing is we're just grabbing, we're first checking to see if they have created or registered using two-factor authentication by seeing if there was any value in that. If it's null, then that means they don't have it set up yet and they just go ahead. If it isn't null, then we have to check to see if they are authenticated using that session variable. Now that session variable will be a Boolean, it's true or false. If they have logged in using two-factor authentication, we just let them go. If not, we need to redirect them based on which method they are using. Now, if they aren't using any method, they're going to get to go ahead anyways. This is only going to occur if they have it set up. And we want to use this middleware function, and we want to prevent somebody from accessing the login success page without being authenticated. So we're going to just throw that in there, copy and paste it. Now it's going to check if they're one-factor authenticated, then two-factor authenticated. And we also want to throw in a little subtitle here so that we know if the user has two-factor authentication set up or one-factor authentication set up. So we're just going to copy that over. This is just going to see if they have been authenticated. If they have, you have logged on with two-factor authentication. If not, you have yet to set it up. And we also want to pass in that subtitle. That comma was already there. Perfect. Okay, so there's just one more piece of code on this page. So you need to scroll down to the logout function so that when the user logs out, we set two-factor authenticated to false. I'd also notice something on the models user model. This secret key needs to be in lowercase s. So once we do that, that should be all of the code. Let's run this and see what it looks like. So we're on this page. Let's log in as our user. We do not have two-factor authentication set up on this user, so let's set it up. So we're going to the account page, then Google Authentication. We're going to get our app out right now and scan this QR code with it. It occurs very quickly, and we will type in the token that it gives us there. It worked. And now that it is set up, all the variables are saved. Now let's log out and see what happens when we try to log back in. This pops up. So we need to type in the code that is being displayed to us for the Google Authenticator. And it's successful. And there we go. That's everything for this method. And some final considerations. For the purposes of this demonstration and for brevity's sake, certain aspects of the implementation aren't necessarily the best option here. So the QR code is generated from a URL. That means we're sending the user's email address and the secret key that we've generated as a request over the internet. It's actually better to generate the QR code in the application yourself, but this demo would end up getting too long if we got more into that. As well as the secret key is being stored in the database as plain text. This should be encrypted the same way that our password is.
Welcome to part 2 of our two-factor authentication tutorial. We'll be implementing two-factor authentication with SMS and text-to-speech. We do have a limitation today. With the free version of the Nexmo/Vonage API, you can only contact the number that you register your account with. Once you upgrade to the paid service, that's no longer a limit, and you can use it in a production environment. So to start, we're going to go register on their website. It's right here. You can get to this file by looking at the README down here. And we'll just go through that process now. So if you don't have an account, sign up, enter your information. They'll send you an email. You'll have to go to your inbox and verify that. And then they'll ask for your phone number. I would recommend making your own account, as this website won't really be functional if you're trying to use my information. Once you have all that, you can log in, and it'll bring you to a page like this. Make it a little bigger so we can see things nicely. This is the information we're looking for, our API key and our API secret. You can copy it without exposing it, just click that. But we're going to be putting it in our globals.js. We'll make our Vonage object, and then we'll put in the elements of API key, our API key value here, our API secret, and our API secret value here. Once that's done, step 1 is done. And then we move on to installing the modules. The one of interest is this Vonage server SDK. Again, these spellings are available in the README. So we press that, enter it in, it installs the module. For the rest of the modules, which you won't have on your initial download, you'll need to an npm install. It can see all of this from package.json, package-log.json, and then everything's installed. There is one thing I failed to mention earlier. If you look at your directory, you may find yourself in two-factor authentication demo. You want to be in starter code, and if you want to follow along, that is. If you just want to see the project running, you can go back and go to final demo, and then just nodemon, and it'll run. I'm just going to fix this up real quick. So we're here. We installed our packages earlier, so we're not worried about it. And that's step 2. So now we're moving on to step 3, which is in our SMS Authenticator.js. I've included all the code here. Might have been showing a bit too much to start. But step 3 is adding the require statements. The first one is responsible for allowing us access to the object type of Vonage. The second gives us access to the values in our globals config, which is what we set up in step 1. So from there, we can create a Vonage object that is configured based on our globals object. So the brand is an identifying piece. In your text, you'll see these words, unless you change them, leading the text, and then the code will be there. While this workflow ID is the behavior in which the API will act around you. What I mean by that is workflow for sends you 2 text messages. The first one early, almost immediately, sends you the code. Well, the next one, a while later, will send you another. And if you don't work with it within 5 minutes, it expires. But there are other options. You can go with purely calling, or you can go with a more hybrid strategy like text, call, call. There are 7 of them. It's up to you if you want to try this. There is a comment with a link to that page right here. So from here, it tries to, or it gets, this is a response, an error and a result. If the result is equal to 0 or 10, we go down here, and it moves on to the next step of passing on the request ID and the user to the check method. Now, if it doesn't get the 0 or 10 results.status, it sends you back to auth verify, which is the part, this method, but the get portion of it, which is done a bit later. So now moving on to the post check method. In here, it's receiving the request ID and the code you've inputted from the check get method. If these numbers are as they should be, because a request ID has a matching code, and if that's entered, you end up here. Some comments describing this. If there's an issue, it sends the people back to the start of the authentication process, which is, well, it's down here. But if it succeeds, you get to the login success screen. You get this session value set to true. We use this to control what people can actually see around the website. Now moving on to step 7. Here we're creating our get method for our verify page. Nothing interesting is going on here. It's just the standard router.get leads to a page. I'll show you the pages once we've completed the 9th step. So moving on to 7b. I clumped these 2 together because they're fairly similar. Again, just another router.get. This is logged in method. Make sure they're at least logged in. They're not authenticated yet. You could do something like this, but nested with a check for this 2-factor authenticated, but we just wanted to get this functioning, and the logic isn't that far stretched to upgrade that. Now, the only thing that's interesting here is this request ID. This is what's matched up with the code to verify if someone successfully authenticated themselves. Again, we'll look at that after part 9, or step 9. This add phone method is just, in the case a user registers without a phone number and they try to authenticate, they can add the phone number to their account. We look up their ID, seeing who's logged in from the request, and then once they enter in their phone, we allow them to register the new phone number. If there's an error, we show it. If it's done, they get sent back to the earliest part of the authentication process, and then they can actually authenticate because they've registered their number here. Yeah, we export it. This is just standard, so your app.js can view this portion or any of the pages in this code. So step 9 is in our index.js. Let's go pop down here. Maybe I should have sat on that longer, but it's just this simple line. Just make sure that when we click the logout, our authentication status is set to false. So now we're gonna go run this. Please ignore what you're seeing already. Now log in or register. Let's do email for now. This is a placeholder, so we're not actually entering our phone number or anything yet. Register says login successful. If you click here, it'll keep on bringing you back. You keep on saying that's fine. Home, a little bit of information. Logout will take you out, but we don't want to go there right now. We want to authenticate, and we have an issue. You have to add a phone number. I'm going to quickly add mine off screen, and now we can request our verification code. Now that's getting sent to my phone right now. I just need to open it up, check my messages, and here it is. As you can see by all that pre-filled text, I've been doing this a few times. Now, instead of getting just login successful on the login success page, we get this two-factor authentication enabled. Click it again, it's still there because we've set our session value. I can show you what this looks like in the HTML. So we're using Handlebars, which gives us the syntax of conditional code. We take in a title. This is some old placeholder code from the part 1 example. It's been commented out because it doesn't do anything here. There's a few more like this. Verify is probably the more interesting one to look through. If there is no user phone value, it'll ask you to enter one, and that's what leads to the add phone method and the action here. If there is a user or the else condition, then we move here. It'll display any error messages that get sent, and it'll pass some hidden values. These will be seeable through the inspector, but it's really not an issue as it's only seeable locally. And from there, we can send our requests. We could look through these a bit more, but pretty basic. You've seen it on the website already. So this was step 10. There's a bit more information down here. A few other guides that I referenced when making this tutorial. We've got the first method's demo code. You can go here if you want to, but you'll probably have seen it earlier in the video. Lots of nice information. And yeah, these are just the main differences between Connor and I's code. It shouldn't affect too much as the starter code I've made is provided. Same with his. But in case you're curious, it's here. The only thing I'd really like to mention is this. If you're working in an HTTPS environment, you really want to set this added cookie secure false to true, as it just adds an extra layer of security. We can quickly take a look at that in our app.js down here. And it's right here. App use session. And yeah, that's all from me.